Please remain seated. The show will begin in 3, 2...
Like a Hellcat.
Hello, ghoul friends. Those who are freaky chic, fans of supernatural, and all things spooky. I'm your host, FandomTraveller87, and welcome back to my channel. Before I continue on with this video, I just want to say thank you so much for listening. And if you haven't already, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell to get all notifications for future uploads. Again, your support is most appreciated. Alright, let's dive right back into the burial vault with The Legend of Jack-O-Lantern Joel, Part 2. At Hollowbrooks County Library, on a rainy late afternoon, Annie had been browsing rows and rows of shelves to find historical records in hopes of starting her research project for a class assignment. Her teacher, Mr. Brown, instructed the students to write about a famous person and present the report by next week. She didn't have to think it over long, because she remembered the name Jack-O-Lantern Joel from the recent event at the diner, and curiosity had been eating away at her sense. It was hard to ignore, as she still saw many people dressed up in the costumes, and she knew if she asked her grandparents about it again, she wouldn't get an answer. Grandpa Joseph and Grandma Phyllis, they just did whatever they could to avoid the subject, by making excuses like they were really busy and just didn't have the time right now to talk about it. She goes to the librarian, Miss Weatherford, an older woman in her late 80s, skinny, tall, and very strict. A no-nonsense kind of gal who was all about facts and didn't care for anyone's opinion if it didn't have a valid standing. Despite being a curmudgeon, she had immense respect for Annie and was like a mentor that helped her stay on track in life. "So, you want to know about Joel Abrams, do you?" she asked in her usual firm tone. Annie slowly nodded. Miss Weatherford cleared her throat and shuffled through some papers before setting them aside. Seemingly a little reluctant, but she gestured Annie over to her office. With the place being empty and nearing closing time, she welcomed the girl inside and shut the door before opening a filing cabinet and taking out a large black leather book with a pumpkin etched on the front of it. "This was published by my brother just a year after, well, the massacres," she explained. 42 years ago, a struggling, reclusive, and quiet farmer moved into Hollowbrooks County, and he was not well liked by the townspeople due to his eccentric, bizarre nature. Joel Abrams didn't care much for them either, liked keeping to himself, and only going into town when it was necessary. He wasn't sociable unless it came down to evoking fear into those that crossed him and rubbed him the wrong way. Annie had listened, rather intrigued, and leaned in closer, having jotted down notes. "What was he famous for exactly?" she asked. "Why, he was most popular with growing the largest pumpkins this town has ever seen," said Miss Weatherford, adjusting her spectacles. "He also enjoyed making moonshine, which you know, of course, is against the law, and his criminal record is extensive. He had his methods of not getting caught, and not only was he responsible for having impact on other businesses, which in fact done more harm than good, he actually wanted to be head of town committee and bought his votes. He became the most hated person in Hollowbrooks County, and he hated everyone who stood in his way of prosperity. Kids back then would always harass Joel Abrams, vandalize his property, like blow up his prized pumpkins, and they would steal anything that wasn't nailed down and was worth value. Joel was never quick enough to catch the thieves, until one fateful night on Halloween of 1960, Randy Cook, the son of a waitress at the local diner in town, got a little too cocky. He always pulled a fast one on Joel Abrams, and his pranks were always harmless. But this prank went much too far, and it had an unfortunate outcome, which led to the start of a very long, frightening, and tragic series of events. Annie arched an eyebrow. "What happened?" she asked. There was a dreaded pause of silence between them, as thunder roared and lightning flashed outside. "Randy Cook poisoned Abrams' beloved horse," said Miss Weatherford eerily. "He poured bleach into the drinking water in the horse's stall while Abrams was out buying parts to fix his combine harvester. The boy thought he'd only make the horse sick, but as it turns out, he ended up killing it in a short amount of time. Annie's eyes widened in shock. She didn't know what to say. What kind of person would do that to an innocent animal? This made Abrams snap. Miss Weatherford continued on. He committed the most unspeakable acts. That night would forever change this town. Then suddenly the phone rang and the old woman answered. "Oh, hello, Phyllis. How are you?" she said, somewhat cheery. I'm fine. Your granddaughter, she's with me. I guess we lost track of time. Yeah, I'll bring her home." Then she hung up, and sometime later she dropped Annie off, then speeding off down the road. Phyllis crossed her arms as she descended the steps, and she looked a bit angry.
"Young lady, come in the kitchen. Now."
Annie gulped nervously and followed close behind, then sitting at the kitchen table.
"All right, little lady, talk."
Grandma Phyllis scolded, sitting down in front of her, folding her arms together as she leaned forward. "What's this about?" asked Annie, confused.
"What was your conversation with Miss Weatherford?"
Phyllis had questioned. Was her grandmother getting suspicious, or was she just concerned about something? Her grandmother looked worried, as though, like, there was some great danger, and Annie didn't know what that was. Joel Abrams," Annie stammered. Phyllis sighed, shaking her head and running her fingers through her hair, both perplexed and overwhelmed with emotions.
"And,"
she breathed, sounding like her voice was going to crack.
"whatever you were told, please just try not to think about it. It's in the past, and it needs to stay there. Please, for my sake, just try to forget."
"But why, Granny?" Annie argued. "I don't understand." Phyllis stood up from her chair and walked over to her side, placing a hand on her shoulder tenderly.
"Your grandfather and me love you and your brother,"
she said.
"We need to do what we have to protect you both. Trust us, Anne. Joel Abrams is not something that you need to worry about anymore. That monster cannot hurt anyone anymore. And that part of town history will remain unspoken. Got it?"
It made Annie mad, but she didn't want to upset her grandma, so the subject was dropped. This didn't deter her from doing more research. What happened to Randy Cook on Halloween night of 1960? What other crimes did Joel Abrams commit? The next day, Annie kept the book that Miss Weatherford gave her. It had a phone number inside it, the number to Richard Weatherford Fleming, author to this book, the only existing copy that was never made into more copies, and never sold on the market. She secretly kept the book in her desk drawer in her bedroom. Aaron was always a recluse, almost never leaving his room. Grandpa Joseph had been working on another scarecrow to help scare away the birds that were eating the corn. Out in the barn, he completed it by adding the final stitches and stringing up the large noodle-armed scarecrow on the post in the center of the cornfield. It was getting dark and windy. As he stood back, admiring his work, there was an odd, unsettling occurrence. Through the howling wind, Joseph heard faint cries, disembodied, agonized cries of torment. They sounded like children? Joseph rubbed his eyes.
Do my ears deceive me?
He thought.
No, I'm just tired.
He walked back to the farmhouse and he looked back a few times, but he figured it was nothing. So that night he had gone to bed like his wife and grandkids. But in the middle of the night, he was tossing and turning, memories from 42 years ago coming back. Missing kids posters, grieving mothers screaming, seeing red and flames, and eventually everything cutting to black. And Joseph stayed awake until he heard the roosters call. And he sluggishly moved around in the house, physically drained. He stayed busy, well, tried to at least. But these weird feelings of eyes on him constantly and being watched, he could just feel oppression. He could feel sorrow, and he couldn't fathom it. Why was this happening to him? And why now? Alright everyone, I really do hope that you enjoyed this video. Please like, subscribe, and hit the bell to get all notifications for future uploads. And of course, thank you so much again for listening. And until next time, I'm your host, FandomTraveller87. I hope you all have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening. All right. Bye.